I thought I would open up with a little bit more about me, to share with you a little bit about the why behind kind of why a topic like this would be of interest to me, and why I want to share with you a little bit more about advocacy for your kids. I know a little bit about you based on the fact that you're here. I know that you guys are parents who care so profoundly about your children, who are willing to make extra effort and dedication to ensure that your children have the best opportunities to succeed. I know that is core to just about every parent, and yet there are those of you who really find a way to go the extra mile. So the very fact that you are here and a part of Parents Challenge tells me a lot about you. Reminds me of when I was in college, I worked on a literacy program where we could get work study, kind of some funding for our tuition through working with our local library and teaching kids to read, just reading with them. It was a district that had a very low literacy rate. And so that was probably one of my first forays into education and that kind of face-to-face interaction with kids who needed a little bit more help, who were coming from not-so-good neighborhoods. And it was such a rewarding experience. And one mom will always stand out to me, and she's the kind of mom who I think of when I do this kind of work, or when we're talking about school choice in the organization that I'm a part of. I don't even remember her name, but what I do know is that she found out about our program early on, and we would just set up a table like this at the local library and take kind of names and fill out slots for folks to do their half-hour tutoring session. And it became a very popular program. So it started getting to, we could only read with a kid once a week in order to make room for the demand of all the kids that wanted to come and read. A lot of these kids had parents who did not speak English, and so they were unable to really do the basic reading with their kid at home, and sounding out of words and understanding, the phonics of it all. So this mom would come anyway, even though she only had one appointment a week. She would come every day after school, take the bus with her kids to just hang out in the library in case somebody canceled and didn't show up. And then she would say, "My kid is here, you can read with him now." And needless to say, that child made huge gains and started becoming a better and better reader. And we all know reading is just the foundation for everything. And I think about that mom because she didn't have much. She didn't have the language, she didn't have the educational level, she didn't have money, but the little bit that she did have was some agency and some power to do what she could, to take advantage of opportunities. And that is the kind of mom that I see, the kind of dad that I see in this room. I know that you guys are going above and beyond to make those strides for your kids. So I congratulate you for that. My why on this topic is very, very personal. So I am the daughter of immigrants. Both my parents came to this country from Mexico. My mom came from the very south, like almost the Guatemalan border. My dad came from the north. Both grandparents brought their families over and came to Los Angeles, and that's all my family's kind of all connected. And my grandparents were friends. My parents married one another. And my mom has an interesting story in that she was the firstborn to a very young mom. And when it came time for her to go to school, she lived in the ranch. My grandparents had cocoa and coffee crops, and that was kind of their industry. But there wasn't a school nearby for her. And so in order for her to get an education at a very young age, they sent her into town to live with my great-grandparents, her grandparents. And so for most of her school years, in order to get an education, she had to be far away from her parents and from her family. My mom is my hero, and just such a resilient person, and doesn't have any weird bitterness or anything. She kind of just did what she had to do. But I know that the ache of all those years of not having been close to her family, just in order for her to get an education. So fast forward, they're now in this country. And my mom
just kind of worked her way through different work opportunities, went to school. But when it came time for us to go to school, she enrolled us in a church school, and like 2 months into my kindergarten year, she realized that she couldn't do it and that she did not really feel comfortable with us being in that environment. And it was a good school. Obviously it was a Christian church school, but she felt like there was so much more that we could be doing if she brought us home. And so I was homeschooled from kindergarten until high school, and graduated and went to college. And it didn't really hit me until a few years ago that I realized that because of the freedom and opportunity in this country, what for her in order to get an education meant going far from home. In this country, because of the opportunities and because of her confidence and faith that she had everything that she needed for her kids, she was able to bring us close and to give us a foundation. There was a lot of questions at the time about, are you really getting educated, and what about socialization, and all the questions that homeschoolers get asked. It worked really well for me, and I was able to learn a lot of things outside of just the book learning that have really set me up, I think, for success. And so that is my why, and why I believe so profoundly in not just school choice as a topic, but really in parents. In parents being the ones who know what is best for their child, who have the knowledge and walk away with a little bit of a better appreciation for the power of freedom in all aspects and how it really impacts and matters in education. Secondly, just the preeminence. That's the word that I thought of. I was thinking of 3 Ps, but the preeminence of your role. Because we can argue about education every political cycle, right? It's going to always be a top issue, and we're going to talk about systems and things that we can do better in this country, and absolutely there are things that we need to do as a nation to improve our educational systems and the things that set kids up for success. But above all of that, the preeminence, the most important, the most critical thing is your role as a parent. And nothing and nobody and no sophisticated society is ever going to trump that. And so I want you guys to take that away as well. And then lastly, which I know you're all here for this reason, but the potential of your child and really believing and being encouraged. I know that parents get really hard on themselves. You always feel like you could be doing something better. You are keenly aware of the fact that your child's future is impacted by yours, but hopefully you walk away with a sense of an excitement and encouragement, knowing that your child is being set up to really reach their potential and be nurtured into the person they're called to be. So that is just a quick little insight into kind of why I care so much about this topic. We have a quote here from President Reagan that says, "Certainly there are few areas of American life as important to our society, to our people, and our families as our schools." I think that we all can agree with that, right? Like I just mentioned, we talk about these things all the time. We need to be doing right by our kids. Every child deserves a great education and a shot at the American dream, and the parents and citizens paying for it deserve a return on their investment in America's generation. Unfortunately, in too many communities, this is not the reality, and overall American students continue to fall behind their peers in other countries. That is like such a shocking and sobering reality when I realize that this nation of so much opportunity continues to lag behind and is failing the generation in which we need to equip to continue to become better and better and stronger, to leave those legacies, right? No parent wants to feel like their generation was set up to do so much better than the next. We want to continue to see growth and building it, that your kids go, as my aunt always likes to say, she says, let our ceiling be the floor of our next generation, of our kids. And we want to see that as a nation, and yet lamentably, that isn't the case in many schools and in many districts. And many people, will say education is the great equalizer. Absolutely, it is a critical component, right? I would like to say, though, that parents are the great equalizer, and parents being involved so that school isn't just about going to school, right? Because we can go to school and check the boxes and get to the next level. But there's a difference between going to school and getting educated. And education is something that happens in the classroom and beyond. And so that is why, as much as education is important, parenting and parent involvement is so much more so. There are many studies, and one of the ones that I read today in preparation for this conversation had a statistic about students living with involved parents showed to have an academic advantage over those who didn't. What does that look like? What is this great? I mean, are we thinking tiger moms who've got like violin classes scheduled from here to here and homework hour and all that? No, the simplest things are what create this advantage. So we have things like parents and children reading together, checking homework, communication between teacher and parent, and that sense that the teacher and the parents are on the same team and then they're working towards the development of their child. Those things to me are so encouraging. When I go and in my role, I probably should have started with this a little bit, but in my role at the Libre Institute, we are partners and a part, like sister organizations with Bridge to Wellbeing and Americans for Prosperity Foundation. We talk a lot about school choice because of how critical education is, especially to immigrant communities who are trying to get to the next level to really achieve the American dream and for their sacrifices in coming to this country to actually yield. That is encouraging to me because as much as we may need these systemic changes, I can give you tangibles about how to give your kid that academic advantage. Reading with your child, checking their homework, giving them that sense of pride in the work that they're doing, communicating and asking questions with their teachers. Simple things that can be so game-changing. So here are some numbers for you guys in a national overview. We have about 50 million kids in the US that are in grades K through 12. So that's 16% of the US population. Obviously that is a significant chunk of kids in which represent our future workforce, our future leaders, our future inventors and scientists. We have 4 million teachers who are responding to the needs of those kids academically, and that is a spending of $604 billion on K through 12 education a year. And you can see the breakdown between federal, state, and local. So on average, that is over $11,000 per child in our nation as a whole. A lot of times folks don't realize what that number is, right? We talk about free public education, but as we all know, there's nothing that comes for free, and it's not just a given. That comes with a price tag, and you're paying the price tag, right? It's not just random neighbors or other people who are footing this bill. This is an investment that as a society we say is important. This is the price tag, and as investors in that, it's important to hold folks accountable for what the product they're supposed to be yielding for us. So obviously that varies per state, and one of the interesting things, and the next slide will show a little bit of a stat, that there's a lot of graphs that out there on different research that mirrors this, that in the past 40 years education spending has more than doubled, but achievement has flatlined. Okay, so our spending has doubled, achievement has flatlined. Here is a stat for here in Colorado, or a graph for here in Colorado. So roughly we pay $10,200 per child in Colorado, and we have similar trends, right? We're not really seeing the achievement mirror this is just SAT tests, so this is not reading and math and those scores. They're not yielding the investment. And I have a little bullet point there, is that we have made an incorrect correlation between spending and achievement. So a lot of those policy discussions that we hear every time that there is a debate and we talk about making education and improvement a priority, we talk about funding, right? We're always talking about, if you care, then our money should be going this way and that way and higher and higher. That's not to say that we shouldn't rightly prioritize education, but during my time in the White House, that was one of the things that we were working on in my department, which was impacts as opposed to just outputs, right? So we worked on things where we would try to get, we had different partnerships with the nonprofit sector to try to see some innovation and response to the human need in our country. And we would get criticized a lot because, well, you haven't given this amount of dollar, as if that's really what was going to be the impact, right? Let's not just talk about the dollar, let's try to measure the impact and how impactful is that dollar. Otherwise, we're just making ourselves feel good, doing the easy thing to just throw money at something to say that we have done the right thing. And that's really a failure to our society and a failure to our kids. Because if we're really going to be making this investment, we should be asking, is this actually yielding? Or are we spending generations after generation repeating the same mistakes and expecting improvement? Let's not fund things without accountability and without knowing that it's actually working. Because I think that if I were to give you $11,000, you probably would come up with some really creative, amazing, impactful, innovative ways to set up your child for success. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we spending this money on, right? So there's a lot of things that go into paying teachers, and that's important, right? If we value them, we want to give them the payment that is due when they're molding our future generations, absolutely. But there's a lot of things that do not reflect just teacher salaries, obviously. Overhead, administration, contracts, and debt, travel costs, those kind of things. So here are some questions to ask if you want to take this a little further and want to kind of arm yourself with knowledge about your child's school. How much does your district spend per pupil? That'd probably be a good number for you to know. And I think that's empowering to know this is how much we as a society are paying, or my district, my county, to educate my child. The non-teaching staff that has been hired recently, the debt that the district has, unfunded pensions, and how they plan to pay for it. You can also see if the superintendent's contract is posted online and see what those expectations are and how much funding is going there. And then asking for an annual financial report. Here's the thing, the more and more we expect something to be a given, the less we take kind of ownership about it, right? I noticed this in some of like the big mega churches, for instance. There's a program for all these community needs. It becomes so much easier to just like give someone a flyer to the local church as opposed to asking my neighbor, what is it that you need and how can I serve that need, right? And so sometimes we become so removed that accountability piece is missing. And so you asking your school, your principals, your teachers, some of these bigger questions, some of these systemic questions, is a part of a small shift in reminding and reinforcing your school that they are there to serve you and your kids, and that you are the customer, and that we as a society and we as a country are investing here so that our child can be set up for success. And then of course that has ramifications on our society when these children are set up and educated to be the business owners and the creators of new products and services and all of those things that go and work together in a free society, right? But the more we're removed from it, the more we're like, oh, this is my local public school and this is a given and they're doing this for me for free, the less you feel empowered to ask. And so asking and knowing what kind of questions to ask and how the system works is going to empower you to feel more confident to be able to be doing that advocacy on a kind of systemic level. Here's where it gets a little more personal, right? Assessing your child's education. Again, I know that you guys are here because you are engaged parents who are looking for the best for your kids. And I know you're probably asking these things along the way, but just as a refresher, how has your child's achievement changed in recent years in your school? Do you feel like they're right on track? Are they going backwards? Sometimes that happens. Are they being engaged? And also, it's not just about teachers and us, right, or the school and us, but it's about being partners with them. So understanding what the teachers' needs are as well, how the district, and finding out what improvement, what accountabilities are being held for them, and what their systems are for teachers who maybe are struggling or whose performance is not being right at the level that it needs to be. Find out if parents are being included in those assessments, right? It may be something that if they're just kind of having their teachers supervised once a quarter, once a month, that may not be as helpful, or an incomplete picture if parent input is not being included in that review. Here are some other measures. Keeping in mind the ratio, right? It's only natural, like you're going to have a harder time permeating knowledge into a one-on-one to a kid and their individual needs if you've got a room full of 30 kids, 30 second graders who can't sit still. So that's something to consider. My roommate was a Denver public school teacher, and the year that she had 28 students, I mean, she was at her wit's end, and she ran a tight ship. But there's only so much that you can do when you've got so many kids in a room. I homeschooled my cousins for a year, grades K through 12. It doesn't help that I'm already a little ADD, but 7 kids with different needs and different emotions on every given day, it's quite the task. Also keep in mind the communication. Obviously everyone's going to be a little different, and we need to have grace for people's personality styles and their communication styles, but having that space to really understand that and come to a place where you're being able to find a way to communicate with each other is critical. Keeping in mind how often they're reaching out to you, how much they're affirming your role. I know that there are some teachers who see parents as nuisances and they get in the way and they just empower my kids to be bratty. Is that the pervasive philosophy of the teachers that you're dealing with? And then just a couple of other notes of just what's being expected of you, and if that's being communicated clearly. I'm going to show a quick video if it came up. So this is a Colorado story of a family that I met through our work with the Libre Institute, who are an immigrant family, obviously came here, made a lot of sacrifices so that their family could get to the next level and achieve. And their son went into kindergarten, and he had known his colors. He would count the steps with them as they would go into their home. And once he got to school, they said that he had a learning disability. So they put him in a special needs classroom, and they said this is what's going to be the best option for your child, and he's going to be able to catch up, and we'll put him back into a regular mainstream classroom. Time went on, and they continued to kind of affirm that this child had special needs and couldn't be in a regular classroom. So he began to actually forget the things that he already knew. He began to kind of assimilate with those around him in his special needs classroom, and his parents were just desperate. She told me at one point they were considering moving back to Mexico because they said, we feel like we're dooming our child to be to spend his whole childhood in an education that was going to be holding him back. So they ended up selling their home so that they could go back to living on one income, so that the mom could at least do some educational things with him at home after school, since he wasn't learning anything. And they just saw him languishing. And in the video you'll see them kind of come near tears thinking about their son. They did end up getting him diagnosed. He did have some challenges. He had a chromosomal deficiency, but the doctor said they had never seen this particular case. And so instead of feeling like, oh well, confirmation, my child has a deficiency, this is kind of what it is, matter-of-factly, the mom's response was, if you've never seen this before, how can you tell me what his limitations are? And so they kept on advocating, and one day, and I'm thankful to say that Libre played a small role in this. Libre was co-hosting an event on School Choice, and we were streaming. We were going to be showing the movie Waiting for Superman, the documentary about education. And so they heard about that on the radio, and they came, and they found out for the first time in their entire time, their son was, I think, maybe 10 or 12 at this point, about charter schools. And they reached out and found out the very next day. They went to another school, they found out, and they got their son enrolled like by that week at KIPP charter schools in Highlands Ranch, even though they live in Thornton. And so that became the mom's primary duty, is just driving the distance. There may have been charter schools nearby her that she was not aware of, but this was the one she heard about on the documentary, and that's where they wanted their child to go. And And that son now is in junior high. He's at grade level. He is emphatic, excited about college. He just feels like he can do anything. He has subjects he's passionate about. The academics are very rigorous, and yet he is enlivened and engaged. And so that story, again, it can be a success story for school choice. It can be a success story about finding the right fit for your kid. But I also think it's a success story about parents who are so in tune with their kid that they noticed when he started to not function in a certain way, right? They noticed that he wasn't excited anymore, wasn't engaged, and they didn't let anyone put a limitation on him. So it says, if you are unhappy, the first step is to really be curious and ask, is this the only way? Is this the best way? I think that's important for just about everything that we do in our society. Is this questioning the status quo and what we think is kind of just the way it's always been, the way it has to be. When you start speaking up, when you start wondering, I think is the beginning of innovation, the beginning of breakthrough. You find out that you're not alone, you start encouraging one another, and then you start getting the courage, right, to take more action. So showing up to school board meetings, as you guys have so much on your plate, you have so many things to do, and showing up to boring meetings where they're talking about budget line items and things that may just not interest you. I understand that it may not be your priority every single time, but I would encourage you to know when those are taking place, whether that's whatever kind of school that you have, whether it's private school, charter school, public school. Find out when those critical meetings are taking place and show up and ask questions and raise your concerns and know what the struggles are that are going on in the district. Again, because so few of us show up to those things, there's this slight perception maybe sometimes that they're doing us a favor, that this is just the way it is, that their salaries and their systems are a given. And again, they're working for us as a community. We have Americans for Prosperity in Colorado Springs, in Denver. School choice is going to always be one of our issues. Parents Challenge is one of the key leaders in that movement. So when they do things like National School Choice Week, celebration that may not seem that impactful, if you only knew how impactful it is to the policymakers and to the news media and to the people who are debating this, when they see a diverse group of parents like this in those photos and those news clips, it's powerful. And it speaks to the power of those who are in charge of decision making and who are power brokers and who are making these decisions on your behalf. So see where your face and your presence will be that check on the system. I would say probably most of you are pretty familiar with school choice since you're here, but I'll just kind of run down some of these things. Every state has some form of school choice. Not every state has the best, right? I come from California where my uncle had different nephews and nieces living with him in Orange County so that they could go to the better public school, right? And you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing just to get your kids somewhere better. I have a friend who's he's in a corrections officer. And I was also working on some criminal justice reform issues. Didn't make the correlation as quickly as I should have, but he sent me a quick message not long ago because I did something on school choice, and I was like, what does Sam have to say about school choice? He said, do you know how many kids in juvenile detention who talked to me about if only I could have been at a better school, who talked to me about I felt trapped, and this was obviously everyone has their own agency and their own decision making, but to think that our schools could have been a breeding ground for this kind of a thing, it's just heartbreaking that they didn't have a choice, right? That their poverty level or their economic level or their neighborhood determined their options. So Colorado has open enrollment, which is great. Yes, there's a lottery system, it could be better, but the fact that you can say, I don't think this is the best fit for my school just because I happen to live here, that's pretty awesome, right? And then you have things like Arizona that have ESAs, and it may not be for everyone, but kids who are trapped in D or F performing schools have a chance to get a $5,000 voucher to go to a school of their choice. Now that is probably what we would love to see more states embracing, right? More states embracing a lot of different options for being able to really thrive. And that doesn't have to be the only one, right? There may be other school choice innovations that we have yet to think of. But the more that we can have, the better. Yes?
Are there any states that don't allow homeschooling?
Not that I know of. Yeah. Her question was, are there any states that don't allow homeschooling? And I said, not that I know of. On your resource sheet, there is a link to a few, or there's some websites that can kind of give you the full picture, but there are different, in some states you have to register and make sure you send a letter of intent and that kind of thing. In some states it's probably less regulated, but for the most part, there is that freedom to also homeschool your child. And then, so when I talk about, so the other innovations, right, charter schools. Are all of you pretty familiar with charter schools? Yeah? Okay, so charter schools, just as a kind of refresher, being public schools that are free from some of the regulations, some of the rules of the normal district schools. And so they're able to innovate a little bit more, and they're able to specify a little bit more. I'm a little more familiar with the stats on the Hispanic community, but for instance, ESL students thrive in charter school environment. They tend to do a little better in terms of reading and language acquisition than in your traditional public school. So if you have an ESL student, I would consider looking into charter schools based on that. There is this misnomer that charter schools, and I've seen it on the news, I saw it on this drama that I've been watching, where they talked about school choice, and these private charter schools are out to destroy traditional public schools, and it just gets me so frustrated because I'm like, they're publicly funded, but they're privately operated. But it is a part of a public school, and I think it's a victory for public schools. It's a victory that our public schools are saying, let's allow for a little innovation and out-of-the-box thinking about how we can actually create an option for families that may not fit the normal district school model. And then of course private schools in general, and the scholarship foundations in places where there aren't ESAs, or there are districts where there are not vouchers, right? There's not a lot of voucher programs. There is a DC voucher program, there's like some small ones, but the fact that there are these scholarship granting organizations that actually make that more possible to access a private school. I know, for instance, also the Denver Archdiocese here, they have their own efforts to say we will make it absolutely possible for every family who wants their child in the Catholic private school to be able to make that happen, and we will find the way. And that may not be the most advertised thing, but there are all these private efforts to try to make that more accessible. So the headline here, I think, comes down to what we've been talking about this whole time. If not you, then who, right? There are kids in those public schools who are foster kids, who live in group homes, who don't have that advocate. We need to do better for them as well. We need their options to be as plentiful as is their desires and their learning styles and all of that. But for your kids, they have you. And who would be a better advocate for them than you? There's a reason why politicians are always trying to grab the personal story, the mom who did this, because you are the best at understanding the needs. They may have the power, quote unquote, but you are the ones who have put the force behind that power. So if you're not thrilled, you have options. And make sure that you are aware, again, if those dollars are being spent effectively, and know that you have everything that it takes to speak up and to make your concern heard, or to just ask. Sometimes it's just a matter of understanding what the challenges may be, to see where you can kind of come in and be a supplement to what needs to be done in terms of the education of your kid. Ultimately, it's your hard-earned dollars and your child's future. This system is supposed to work for you. Teachers are supposed to be working for your kids. And I don't want it to come across like we're just saying, we need to go and demand our rights. It's important though to remember those things, right? I think it's very easy to be put in a position of, will you please do this for my kid? But to remember that you are both engaged with the school and the parent and family and community for the betterment of your child. Again, the why for me, and the reason why I'm excited and encouraged for you whose kids are kind of somewhere, right, with their whole lives in front of them, is that one immigrant ESL mom thought if she could do it, if she could have a son who graduated from Notre Dame, master's full ride, if she could educate her kids by herself, then how much more could you? And as much as we have problems to address in our public schools and in all schools, right? Just because we're talking a lot about public schools because that's the free one, this applies to all schools. Because even the best classical academy or prep school, your child is a holistic person, and they're not going to achieve their potential if they don't have that coming from you, right? And that's not to put that extra pressure on all of you. It's just to encourage you to say, you and your limitations are everything that your kid needs to succeed. So I'm going to kind of close with just some victories. I want you guys to think about one thing that you have done that you know has made a difference for your kid academically and in just their development as a whole. And then one thing that you're curious about, that you wonder may be something extra that would make your child excited about learning or really feel like he or she is achieving. So I'm going to put those two questions to you to discuss, and then we'll kind of close and hand it over. One victory, something that you know you've done, and one curiosity about improving your child's education. But I would love to hear from a couple of you on that first question. What is a victory that you've had in your child's education that you've advocated for? Ready?
Well, one of the things that I, as a parent, do with my child is, since my son's been really little, just spending the extra 15 minutes to an hour, sometimes even over, just going into books, because like you said, it's that gateway. And so I knew that early on because I struggled all through grade school with that. So for me, it was just taking that extra time to make reading like a whole new world for him. So that's what I did.
Awesome. If there are others of you who really prioritize reading in your home, a huge, huge, huge round of applause, standing ovation, because honestly, that is the bedrock. And it's not just for capacity, right, to be able to read and get through school and do all the other things, but it really, 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 in our digital age, the attention span that is developed in being able to read and follow a story page by page, and then graduating to chapter books where there aren't any pictures, and comprehending exactly, that is just, those subtle things make such a huge difference in their ability to really achieve. And so I am a huge advocate of that. So congratulations to all of you who really have taken the time to prioritize that. Anybody else want to share a victory, a small thing that you know you've done that is making a difference? Small difference? Sure.
But just because I felt, because I stepped out of my comfort zone, we had God opened the door for us. The next year, we went to another private school, East Alabama Public School, which is closer to the school that she attended now. And it was less than half of that price.
Wow.
It just, continue. I think as parents, if we step out and do our part, all kind of doors are open.
And I love what you said about when, as parents, we do our part. the doors of opportunity just open. I think that can be applied to so many things, right? But I think sometimes education can be a little daunting because we're not the experts in that subject, in that grade. And so to have that courage and that confidence to seek out the opportunity and see what that curiosity and that courage is met with is huge. Yes?
It's more of a minor
Yeah.
scale. I've been having a really hard time with spelling. And he went through IEPs for years, and I mean, he just was not ever going to learn it. It's not something and it was going to work. And so we just met with the teachers and said, is there any other way he can take his test, or, and so we problem solved, and he was able to get a computer, and so he spelled the word phonetically, and then it would kind of show the autocorrect.
Yeah.
What it should be, and so then he could, press the word and get the word spelled right, and so he got his ideas across, and then let the team do it, correcting for him. So that was a neat model for him.
That's awesome, but I mean, you said minor, right? And I think one of the things I touched upon earlier is all of those minor things add up, right? So for those of you who weren't able to hear, her son struggled with spelling, was on IOP a few times, trying to really overcome that challenge. And her curiosity of, is there a different way that he could be tested on this, allowed them to come up with an innovative solution for him to be able to use a computer that then autocorrected for him and allowed him to kind of get his ideas across. And I'm wondering too, because sometimes autocorrect is helpful because you're like, oh, I was so close, and you kind of start seeing the correct one over and over. But that also unleashes that confidence, right? To realize I'm not bad at school, I'm bad at spelling, but I have ideas that are worth sharing, and I'm capturing the information, and I'm able to reflect that information. And that burst of confidence that leads to even greater achievement in school. So it may be a minor victory, but it's really setting up for some other major victories. Anybody else? I love these stories. I am encouraged. I hope you guys are encouraged. Yeah, speak loud.
Okay, well, with my son, he's in third grade, and my daughter's in preschool. And I've noticed that they learn differently, but I've gotten comments from both of their teachers that they can tell that their parents are involved. Because my son and my daughter will both ask questions. I have told them over and over that as long as they are respectful, when they don't understand, it is okay for them to ask. And so I've had both of my teachers, my parents' teachers tell me, or my kids' teachers tell me that thank you for teaching them how to be respectful when they don't understand. Because my son will ask, and he will continue to ask until he understands. And he's not afraid to raise his hand. And I think that's the biggest thing, because I've noticed with my going to school, I was always the one that was going to sit in the front and ask the questions. And there were so many people that didn't have the courage to ask. And so I don't want my kids to feel that way, and to know that they are asking those questions and making sure that they understand is like a real victory for me.
Absolutely.
Because I know how scary it can be in school. And no one else is raising their hand. You don't want to be that kid that's like, well, I don't get it, when a bunch of other kids probably don't get it either, and they just don't want to.
Right. So as a recap for the recording, she has really made it a priority to teach her kids that as long as they ask respectfully, they can ask any question in terms of not being able to grasp what's being taught to them. And just that the teachers have been able to say, thank you that you've empowered your children to be able to ask, right? Because how can a teacher modify their approach and if they don't know that the kid isn't learning? And there's so much of that. I experienced it myself in college and being like, I'm going to figure it out on my own. Because you just don't want to be the person who's always asking and not getting it through. But then you realize that there's other kids who are in the same boat. So in some way it's also a peer advocacy, because you're taking the courage to ask and to really make sure that you're leaving with your dollar's worth of education that day and really getting it. So that's, again, those minor things, but they're so empowering. Anybody else? Yeah. Can I give this to you? Let's see. Okay, there you go.
So I have season of prayer. When they started like first grade, my son had finding his skills delay, so his handwriting was always there with him. And the teacher always had a hard time understanding my work, so he wasn't passing his class. And I asked him if there's anything I could do. We tried the handwriting book where you go, you interact with them. They try to write in clay, with a nail to straighten their head also. It was back right in there. It helped a little bit, but they were still having a hard time. So I asked them, since I work in the hospital, is there any way that he could speak what he want to write, and the computer could type it for him, and they allowed him to do that. That was 9 days.
Wow.
Instead of writing,
Right.
you would put it on the computer.
Right.
And they use a program called the Dragon Speak.
Okay.
That's actually what the doctors write to do their program, to report on patients.
Yeah.
And he started using the
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So those of you, again, I have to do it for the mic here, advocating, your child had difficulties with being able to write, actual physical difficulties. And so asking, can we come up with a different way of doing this? And finding a software so they could actually speak their thoughts and their responses and their projects so that it kind of translates it for it and dictates. You get to take dictation software. And there's so many things that maybe somebody else might have thought, oh, there's no way, and my child's gonna have to struggle with this because that's their limitation, their physical challenge. But asking, and then finding, right, that there's willingness on the other hand, on the other side as well, to come up with something that's going to be more successful for the child and set them up to continue to be encouraged and not feel downtrodden. Anybody else? Well, I would encourage you to continue to share, because I think also this gives you, when we start sharing kind of some of the things that we do, right, or we've done, it starts kind of triggering more ideas as well, like, oh, I hadn't thought about maybe that particular challenge. The same is true with the things that you're curious about that could be doing better for your child. But I wanted to end on victories because I know that you guys have a hard job and it's easy to feel like there's so much more you could be doing. And I want you to be reminded that you're doing an amazing job and that the passion that you have for your kid, it translates and it reaches them in their character and their identity and gives them the confidence that they need to continue to even brainstorm their own ways around some of those challenges. I do want to open it up for questions if you guys have any. Happy to answer. Yeah.
The main reason why I wanted to come is that you had any tips that when you go to the teacher and you talk to them and you don't get a response, and you go to the principal and you're still not getting a response, what's the best way to handle that?
Yeah, so that I'm going to maybe even open that up to the group. So you talk to the teacher, no response. You talk to the principal, no response. So that indicates kind of a systemic issue, right? There's something off with the culture of the school. You can continue to escalate it, obviously, but I want to open it up to those of you who maybe have encountered something like that and have some ideas. Anyone who want to speak to that?
I guess, like my kid is on an IEP, and he was at a good school, he was at a great school, and his second grade teacher, he had issues. But I'm not one to be a walking back, so she didn't really like me afterwards, so I would email and didn't get a response. And then I CC'd it to the principal, and I got a response there, but then there was something else that kind of happened, and they wanted us to suspend him, and I said, no, they're not going to, because there's a deeper issue. It was more of a bullying issue. When he's done, he's done. So he turns around and punches the kid. But as we got there, and I said, you know what? I said, I'm done. So I'm going to write certified letters to the school and to the board. Well, vice principal backed up on me and said, well, we'll just do in-house suspension. I said, that's fine, because no, we don't need it. There's other ways. But I guess it depends on what, if they have any issues. Like an IEP is a federal document. If they do not follow what's in the IEP, they are in really big trouble. So if they don't, then I would start, writing your letters, and then start writing certified letters, because then that's your proof of, hey, I talked to the teacher, I talked to principal, I talked to counselors, I've talked to, and I'm not getting the help I need. But then you have this trail of, there's an issue here, and what are you gonna do about it? And then that's set before them, and they have to either do something, or it's a big mess. Like I said, it depends on what your child needs too. Like if I'm not walking at it, I'm not very quiet.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing too with it is documentation. If you just do it verbally, they can easily say, oh, we didn't have that conversation. It's your word against theirs. But when you have documentation, you can say, look, I've come to you several times with this. And almost the way you word everything, like she said, she wasn't a walking mat. You have to make sure that when you're addressing those issues, that your tone is assertive, even if they're just reading, so that they know that you're not going to back down, that this is your child and you're going to deal with it one way or another. And I think that having that documentation is a good thing, so that you can say, look, I sent you this, that, nothing's been taken care of, I'm going to go to the board. If the board doesn't handle it, you have all this documentation to go in to say, look, there is something going on, we're going to take it higher up, just so that they know that you're not playing around. Because I think a lot of times they hear so many empty threats that they're just like, oh, here's another one, and we'll just push it under the rug, and then they'll give up.
And a lot of times too, is sometimes they don't, not every parent is involved in their child's education. So when they do get a parent that is involved in their child's education, either, I don't know if scared is the right word, but they kind of brush it underneath the rug and,
See if it'll go away.
they're just trying to help out. But then I always told them, I am my child's advocate. I'm my only child's advocate. I said, you guys you're here to teach or whatever, but when it comes down to certain things, I'm the one that has to deal with it. I said, my goal is to make sure he walks and to be a productive citizen when he graduates. So whatever needs to happen, that's what I'm here to do. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry, that's your problem, that's not mine. Because my child needs to have an education.
Question, what grade is your child in where you're having that?
So I've had the problem for the past 2 years where I've got medical documentation, turned in medical documentation. I've talked to people at the district building and didn't get any progress. When I joined this group, I expressed that concern, and then I promptly got a phone call that I hadn't gotten in the last 3 years. But I don't think if I wouldn't have found out about
Right.
the challenge, because I just found out about it because I saw little people walking and I wanted to know where they were going. So that's the only reason I found out. But
Right.
I was so frustrated because I went to the doctors, I got all my documentation, I turned it in, I notated when I talked to them, I notated, when I was meeting with the teachers.
Right.
And it was very frustrating because I'm like, I know my child is capable of these things. And when I asked the teacher, what can I do to support you? Oh, well, just read.
Right.
Get on the computer and use an app. Well, before there was apps, we had a way to learn. And there's so many parents that don't participate.
Right.
Why are you telling me, you're brushing me off if I'm coming in and I'm constantly coming in and asking you, hey, this is what I saw in her homework, or every paper she brings home is an A, so how does she have a D in this class? The two don't add up.
Right.
I saved the paper so I could say, hey, how can you go from A to D?
Right.
And that's, in a few weeks. It doesn't make any sense. And
Right.
it just kept blowing me off and kept blowing me off, and I was really upset. But if I wouldn't have had Parents Challenge to advocate for me, then I need to know what do I do, or what do I tell other people
Right.
to advocate for themselves, especially when you're going to the district building and you're talking to people and they're blowing you off.
Right. That's where it ought to, right? The system ought to be allowing for that ability to escalate and get the problem settled. I know just kind of basic feedback on that. one parent is easy to ignore, but a multitude of parents is not. So I would start also kind of building relationships where possible. I mean, I know it's kind of an in and out thing, but with other parents. Sometimes they may not be in the know, but you can be the voice that helps them start tracking the same things. And when more of you are starting to show up to those board meetings or showing up to the district or flooding with letters, unfortunately, it shouldn't take a big movement, right, to get what you need for your kid. But if that's where we are, that's where we are. And so it starts to become about how do I put more pressure? Because if they don't feel like there's going to be any fallout for not doing their job, then nothing's going to get done, right? And it could be that they're overworked and they're swamped, and there could be a lot of reasons where we can graciously kind of assume the best. But your child has one education, right? They only have one second grade, one eighth grade, and they don't always have the luxury of being able to wait till the system gets its act together. So that's one thing I would say is kind of getting other voices involved, pointing them to other resources. I mean, it seems like you're plugged in here now and you have that action, but if there's somebody else that may not have a parent's challenge nearby, I would ask them to look. There are parent advocacy groups out there, obviously PTA, things like that. Showing up, volunteering. One thing I've heard is that parent engagement is incredibly welcomed, K through 5 maybe, right? It's like we need, mommy come in here, volunteer, I need you, you guys are my best friends. But getting into the older grades, it becomes this division. Don't take that. Don't accept that. Don't take that for granted, like kind of the culture. Don't accept the culture. I would say keep on with that presence and showing up and finding ways to become integrated into the school.
I put in for the volunteer system at the school. I did the fingerprints, did the whole background thing. I will call you when we're ready. It's been a year and a half.
Right. So here's the other thing too, right? There is another mom I spoke with in Arizona who's huge on public schools, and she was motivated to be the change in her school. And it got to the point where the school she was at was not responsive to that desire, and nobody else seemed to be engaged with that. And so there was a cutoff point, saying I can't keep gambling my child's education by trying to make a difference here and hoping that there's going to be a change. And that's when you have to ask the hard question, is this the school that I need to be a part of? I'm putting all this effort and trying to get just a phone call back. Maybe some of that effort needs to be put into a different school that is actually going to be responsive and be collaborative with me in my child's education. My answer to best educating your child isn't running and always like just kind of, you could be bouncing around forever, right? But if you're having that kind of difficulty, I think that's the hard question you need to ask. Is it, do I start mobilizing and really making a difference, or do I need to find a better fit for my child? Yep.
Networking and knowing exactly who works in the office is a huge thing. And if you can network and get out there and know the key players of the schools that your kids go to, it's huge. If you can be in their face, whether they like it or not, just be there. Talk with their teachers once a week at least. Know who their friends are. Most, and I say most because it's not all schools that are welcome, but most schools have it set to where you can go in and you can sit in your child's classroom at any time you want. You have that right as a parent to be there with your child at any given time. I would encourage, if your kids having issues, go in, find out what your friends are. Start finding out, no matter what the age. My 8th grader would hate it if I walked in grade school. But you know what? If he starts getting in trouble, I'm going to be sitting right there beside him in his English class. And I'm going to know who his friends are. And I'm going to reach out to their parents and find out, hey, this is what's going on with my kid, and I know that they're friends. Is there anything that I need to know, or do you want my kid to stay away from your kid? I mean, just ask the questions. And if somebody doesn't want to answer a question, they're going to tell you I don't want to answer, but at least you ask. And you can't go back and say, well, I didn't do my part. I've got an 8th grader, a 6th grader, and a kindergartner, and I've always
met with their teachers at least once a week to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do, and they know my face. They know that I'm a no BS type of parent. I don't put up with the crowd at home, and I'm not going to let them do the crowd in school. So if there's issues, I would definitely get to know the staff, and before your kids go into middle school or into high school, get to know the front desk, the people in the front office, because they're the ones that's going to push you to the principal to tell, be honest about truth if your kids are in there, or if they're having issues that they see in the hallways. 9 times out of 10, their friends are going to know what's going on with them before you know. And it's really hard with kids nowadays, especially with all the gun controls and the shootings and stuff at schools and the bullying that's been going on for years. It's get to know everything you possibly can about the school and about the people who work there. You never know who's watching your kid and who's not.
Right, so,
As an educational media company, we do research a lot.
yeah.
And what I wanted to reiterate is something that you said. Sometimes if you call it an IEP to the teachers, it doesn't mean so much, but if you call it a 504, have you heard that term? This is section 504 of the federal law. And not only that, but it was enacted in like the 70s as civil rights legislation. So it's serious. And so sometimes you just call it a 504, you can change the whole tone of the conversation.
So I'll just reiterate that in case anyone didn't hear it, that referring to the IEP as a 504, which is kind of the federal documentation for your child's learning plan, and if that is not being met, there are serious repercussions for that. Obviously, you don't want to be the parent who's just out there threatening to do this and that and the other. But a situation like the one that you just described is very frustrating when you're doing your part, you're following protocol, you're escalating, you're talking to the right people, you're volunteering, you're not just, or you're wanting to volunteer, you're not just trying to be, you know, the squeaky wheel when things are not going well. It's important to know those elements, to have them as a resource. And what she was saying back there is that networking and knowing just who those people are. Obviously, ideally, you're going to want to have that relationship with your school and your teachers before there's a problem, right? So that you're able to then kind of rely on some of that relational capital. But when you're not being met with that ability either, then that's when you start thinking about how do you actually formally escalate or reevaluating if that's where your child needs to be. But again, I want to emphasize that piece on the relational side of, like, as your kids are starting to transition into grades, finding those spaces where you can just be present and be a support and seeing as an ally. On the teacher side, when I taught for a year in the junior high, that was my desire. Of course, every teacher is going to approach it differently, but my desire was to know as much as I could and where to connect, and for parents to know my heart for their kids. And that seemed to make things a little bit easier when their kid was getting a grade that they didn't want, or they thought I was being unfair, because they knew the unique things that I loved about their kids, the unique talents that I saw in them. They knew that I was seeing their kid as a person with so much value and potential, that there was actual love in my heart for their student, right? We're all going to respond differently when we feel like someone is for us. So I come from a long line of strong women. I'm all about knowing where the line is drawn and being that mama bear that says you can't keep on discriminating for whatever reason, but it ends up being discrimination when you're not allowing my child to learn, or you're not acknowledging or hearing from me, right? That is really a barrier that you're causing for me to have to overcome that is unfair. There's a need for that side. But before it gets to that, also allowing your school and your teachers to know that you're also for them and that you want to partner with them. I know that just sounds kind of fluffy, but that can be very pivotal and key before those challenges start being met. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
My question goes out to situations where obviously us being involved with parents, there are times where we might presume that teachers aren't doing their job, and it actually falls on the parent. The parent may not be doing their job. They think my child is bringing home D's and F's, or they're bringing home C's consistently. Where's the failure rates, where does a parent get that understanding that I can find out where my child is in their education, rather than the school is in charge of that.
Right.
So I just get told, and now I have to figure out what they're really, how well they're really doing.
Right.
What's the reality? Just because they tested, I hear some people saying, my child wasn't, let's see, I figured out that my child wasn't performing at this level, so it's supposed to help them, or they did perform better. So I guess, what can a parent do in a case like that where the school is
Doing their
giving
part.
them bad grades because they're not performing at that level?
Right.
Everything they do to help that child isn't bringing them up either.
Okay, so this is about kind of achievement, and when your child is struggling and the school is doing its part, but the child is still not necessarily retaining and achieving at the level that they should, and where is the parent's responsibility? I think there's so much that can go into that. I do want to emphasize that grades, while they can be a very good indicator of how your child is doing in school, it's also important to know how your school is performing, because if your kid is getting straight A's at a school that is below level in the district, they may not be getting the education that they could be getting across the street or at home or at a charter school. And that can be very, very disheartening for a child that then is trying to get into college and realizes that they don't actually have the education, they're not equipped to thrive outside of cap and gown and feeling like the top of the world. Being the homeschooler that I am, I think it's limitless what parents can do to reinforce where their kids are, how their kids can achieve. It does take, however, a lot of that supplemental extra time and work. I think it's critical to think about the learning style of your child. Is this something that is an actual learning disability? Is it a lack of passion? Are there emotional things going on? I mean, there's so many things I think that impact a child's ability to thrive. And also obviously depending on where they're at. So I think determining where the real factor, or what the real factor is for that challenge is critical. And then finding out, I mean, as much as we said before apps, right? It's true, before apps there was ways to learn, but even now having the resources of Khan Academy and all these different lessons on YouTube, I mean, there are so many resources out there to supplement the learning and hopefully then finding out where the gap is. I would do assessments, like I know that even something like the Myers-Briggs test or personality stuff can really help give you insight into how a child best learns, and figuring out if there's a different way to back into that. And then again, is there a school that is a better fit for that, that's more tactile, that's gonna really celebrate the things that they do well, or a program that is at the school that may be helpful. So I think it is that the question that you asked is incredibly important, because a lot of times we do see the finger pointing, right? Well, my school is failing, then the school thinks, well, the parents are failing. And so it is really important to be self-reflective first. I mean, what could I be doing differently to set my kid up for success? And hopefully in that investigation, I don't think there's an exact answer or exact science, but hopefully in that investigation, you get a little closer to where the gap is and really figure out then your plan after that, and hopefully collaboratively with your school. Hope that's helpful. Yeah. Awesome. All right, so I think we are just about out of time. Thank you guys so much for your time and just for encouraging one another.